"She will do," said Lucian Hale, 6th Duke of Kingsley, 3 hours after his wedding. "She is nobody, and nobody is precisely what the clause requires. She will not expect to be loved, and I shall not be obliged to pretend." His solicitor made a note. His cousin Fenwick laughed. And behind Lucian, in the deep window embrasure of the Kingsley library, where the curtain had been drawn back all along, a wine glass was set down on stone with a small, exact click. He turned. His wife of 3 hours was sitting on the window seat with a plate of wedding cake she had evidently carried in there to eat in peace. She was still in the gray silk she had been married in. She had heard every word, and she did not look away when he found her, and she did not weep. "Go on," said Honora, Duchess of Kingsley. "I should like to hear the rest of the clause." Fenwick left the room with the speed of a man who had suddenly remembered a horse. The solicitor gathered his papers and followed, murmuring, and the door shut, and Lucian stood in the middle of his own library and could not for the life of him think of a single thing to say. "The clause," his wife prompted. "My grandfather's entail." His voice came out level, which he was obscurely grateful for. "I inherit the Kingsley estates absolutely if I am married before my 40th birthday. If I am not, the land passes to Fenwick, and the house with it, and the 11 farms and the village. My birthday was the 9th of this month, and I was cheaper than a season in London." "You were," he stopped. "Please do not be delicate now, Your Grace. It is very late for delicacy." She set the plate aside and stood, smoothing the gray silk with hands that were not quite steady, and he noticed that and wished he had not. "I was the bailiff's niece who kept the parish school. My uncle had your ear. You wanted a woman with no family to make demands, no fortune to require settling, and no expectations you would have to disappoint. I understood that in September. I accepted it in September. I am not a fool, and I did not come here in a mist of romance." "Then I fail to see." "You fail to see," Honora said, "why a woman who agreed to a bargain should mind hearing it said aloud. No, I don't suppose you do." She walked to the door. Then she stopped with her hand on it and turned, and Lucian discovered that he was braced as though for a blow. "I will keep my half," she said, "every letter of it. Your house will be run better than it has been run in 20 years. Your tenants will not lose another winter to a leaking roof because nobody in this building will look at a ledger, and I will never once ask you for a thing you did not promise me." Her chin lifted. "But you have made a mistake, and I want it on the record since your solicitor has gone. You said I will not expect to be loved. That is quite true. I never did. What I expected was to be told the truth to my face rather than behind my back in my own house. That is not love, Your Grace. That is only manners." She went out, the latch fell. Lucian Hale stood alone in the library for a long time with the taste of his own words in his mouth, and found that he could not remember, in 11 years of being feared by better men than Fenwick, ever having been so comprehensively put in the wrong by somebody who had not raised her voice. He expected tears at dinner. There were none. He expected reproach, or the martyred silence he had watched his mother practice for 2 decades. There was none of that either. What there was, beginning the following morning, was a duchess. She rose at 6. He knew because he saw the light under the door of the small estate room at the end of the east passage, a room nobody had used since his father's time, and by the end of the first week, there was a fire in it and 3 ledgers open on the table and a jar of pens. By the end of the first month, she had been over every farm on the estate on foot. Lucian heard of it sideways, the way a man hears of weather in a country he does not visit, from his steward, who was frightened of her, from the vicar, who was in love with her, from the housekeeper, who said, with a kind of astonished loyalty, that her grace had gone into the back kitchens and asked to be shown where the damp came in, and had listened to the answer. In November, she came to him in the library with a paper. 11 roofs, she said. 4 are past patching. If they are not done before the frosts, you will lose 2 families to the town in the spring, and the Barrow farm will go out of tillage. And then you will have paid 3 times over for the pleasure of not having spent £400 in November. She laid the paper on his desk, squared to the edge. The figures are all there. I have not rounded anything in my favor. Lucian read it. It took him some minutes, because it was very thorough, and because he had not expected it to be. You did this yourself. There was nobody else doing it. My steward. Your steward is 68 and has been managing your father's estate for 30 years and cannot be made to understand that it is now yours. She said it without malice. He is honest and he is tired. I would not dismiss him. I would give him the timber and the fisheries which he loves, and let me have the farms. He looked up at her. She was standing on the other side of the desk with her hands folded, in a dark blue gown he had not seen before and had certainly paid for without being consulted, and she was waiting for his answer the way a subordinate waits, respectfully, and entirely without hope. That was the detail that stayed with him afterwards, entirely without hope. Do it, he said. Thank you, she turned to go. Honor it. She stopped. It was the first time he had used her name. Why, Lucian said, you owe this place nothing. You could have kept your half of the bargain by pouring tea and being ornamental. Nobody would have blamed you. I certainly should not have. His wife considered the question, with the same care she had evidently given the roofs. Because they are cold, she said. The Barrow children sleep under a canvas sheet because the thatch is gone over the loft, and I have seen it, and now I cannot unsee it. That is the whole reason. It has nothing to do with you at all. And she went out and closed the door quietly, and Lucian sat with her paper in his hands and understood that his wife had just told him, with perfect courtesy, that he was not the most important thing in his own house. He should have been angry. He waited to be angry. He was not angry. He was ashamed, and beneath the shame, disgracefully, he was interested. Winter closed in, and Lucian began to do something he would not have admitted to under oath. He began to follow his wife about his own estate. Not openly. He rode out at 11 because that was when she walked, and found reasons to be at the Barrow gate or the smithy or the long lane above the church. He watched her stand in a farmyard in the rain with her skirts 6 inches deep in mud, listening, really listening, with her head tilted, while a tenant explained a drainage ditch. He watched her hold a lantern for a man setting a rafter and be told, cheerfully, to hold it higher. He heard her laugh, which he had never heard in the house. In January the roofs were finished, and the frost came, and nobody left in the spring. In February she took a fever, and Lucian discovered how bad things had become with him. It was 3 days. On the second night the physician used the word pleurisy, and said that her grace had been out in wet clothes too often, and Lucian sent him away and sat in the chair by the bed himself, because he found he could not be anywhere else. She did not know he was there. She talked a good deal about the school, about a boy called Tom who could not be got to learn his letters, about her uncle, about the canvas sheet over the Barrow loft. She never once, in 3 nights of fever, mentioned her husband. Somewhere before dawn on the 3rd night, Lucian Hale put his head in his hands and admitted the truth to himself, that he had married a woman in order not to be obliged to feel anything, and that it had failed so completely that he was now sitting in the dark terrified of a cough. She woke on the 4th morning, weak and lucid, and found him there unshaven with his cravat gone. "You look dreadful," she said. "I have been informed." "Have you been in that chair all night?" 3 nights. Honora was quiet. Then, with great effort, she turned her head away on the pillow. "You needn't," she said. "It isn't in the bargain. I told you I should never ask." And Lucien, who had spent 11 years making other men wait for his answers, found himself unable to give one. He waited until she was strong enough to be angry, which took a fortnight. Then he came to the estate room at the end of the east passage and knocked, and waited to be told to enter, which he had never done in any room of that house in his life. She was at the table with the ledgers, a shawl over the blue gown, thinner in the face. "I have come to withdraw something," Lucien said. "Withdraw?" "What I said in the library on our wedding day." He remained standing. He had thought about how to do this for 2 weeks, and had arrived at the conclusion that there was no way to do it that did not cost him something, and that paying was the point. Every word of it was true when I said it, and that is the worst of it. I did want a wife who would not expect to be loved, because I had watched my parents and concluded that a marriage without expectation could not become a disappointment. It was cowardice dressed as arithmetic. I was very pleased with it. Honora set down her pen. "You were in that window," he went on, "and you heard me call you nobody, and then you got up the next morning at 6 o'clock and saved 11 families whose names I did not know, and you have never once asked me for anything, and every day since I have understood a little better what I threw away with both hands on the 9th of September. His voice was not entirely steady. "I do not ask you to forgive it. I am aware there is nothing you want from me. But I find I cannot go on letting you believe you are keeping half a bargain with a man who feels nothing, when the truth is that I am in love with my own wife, and have been since November, and have been too proud to say so to a woman I had already insulted." The fire ticked. Outside, the February light lay gray on the park. "Say the last part again," said Honora. "I am in love with you." "No," she said, and her voice cracked straight down the middle. "The other part, that you knew what you threw away." "I knew it the day you brought me the paper about the roofs." He came a step nearer and stopped, because he had promised himself he would not crowd her. "You stood there and waited for my answer entirely without hope. I have thought of that face every day since. My wife, in my own house, expecting nothing. I did that. I would give a great deal to undo it, and I cannot, so I am obliged instead to spend whatever years I am given proving that it is no longer true." Honora Hale, Duchess of Kingsley, put both hands over her face, and Lucien stood absolutely still and let her, because it was the first time she had wept in front of him, and he understood that it was a privilege and not a summons. When she lowered her hands, she was almost laughing. 11 roofs, she said unsteadily. 11 roofs and a fever, and all this time I thought I was being tolerated. You were being loved by a coward. It looks remarkably similar from the outside. I am sorry for it. Lucien, his name for the first time, come here. He came. She stood, holding the table edge, and he put out his hand and she took it. And then his other hand came up to her face, and he touched her cheek as though she were made of something that had already been broken once. "I want a new bargain," she said. "Name it." "You are to tell me the truth to my face, always, even when it is unflattering, even when it is you who come off badly, especially then." Her fingers tightened on his. "I do not require you to be a good man every day. I require you not to say things about me in rooms I am not in." "Agreed." "And I keep the farms." "You keep the farms," said the Duke of Kingsley, "and the timber and the fisheries, and I imagine within 5 years the whole of the county. And I shall be reduced to signing what you put in front of me and being proud of you in public." "That will do," said Honora, and reached up, and Lucien bent, and there was no clause in any entail in England that covered what followed. There was a good deal of talk. Fenwick told half the county that his cousin had married a bailiff's niece to cheat him of an inheritance, which was perfectly true, and Lucian never once denied it. What he did instead, in his slow and immovable way, was take his wife everywhere. To the assize ball, to the bishop's dinner, to the front pew on his arm every Sunday, while the Barrow family watched from the back with their new thatch over their heads. When a viscountess made a remark within his hearing about the schoolmistress Duchess, Lucian agreed with her placidly that her grace had indeed kept the parish school, and added that it explained why she was the only person at the table who could add. The school got a proper roof and a proper mistress, and eventually a boy called Tom who learned his letters at last and went on to be Kingsley's land agent. And on a September evening years later, sitting on the window seat of the library, the same deep embrasure, the curtain drawn back, Lucian looked up from his book at his wife's gray head bent over a ledger, and said the thing he had been thinking for 2 decades. "I said you would do." Honora did not look up. "You did." "It remains," said the 6th Duke of Kingsley, "the most spectacular understatement of my life.